Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here. Today is Friday the 13th of December 2019 and today we have a majority Conservative government. I didn't know whether to make this video or not because I'm still pretty overwhelmed. I stayed up late last night to watch it. I got a couple of hours of sleep and then woke up again and watched the rest, and I think the overwhelming feeling is of kind of like despair, and it's almost a sense of hopelessness, which I am desperate to fight because we are not hopeless in this. You know, there is still hope and there's still so much we can do and so much we need to do if we're heading for another 5 years of the Tories to help people who need it. But it is this feeling of like the world sort of crushing in, you know. It's that feeling of like, what else can you say? You know, there's children in poverty, there are people on the streets, the schools are underfunded, the NHS is on the brink of collapse. What else can you say, you know, to make people vote? And I think at first I felt like an anger, and I think that that was quite a natural response. I think I felt really angry at people for choosing Boris Johnson's Tory party, which is pretty hard right as well. They're not even really centre right, they're pretty hard right, for choosing them over a manifesto that would have helped so many people. But I'm trying to understand it more from different perspectives. Of course there are people in the Conservative Party and there are people in society who are just greedy and are just selfish and will vote for their own interests, and they don't care about the vulnerable. They just want to make sure that they don't have to pay any higher taxes because they know that to them this election doesn't mean anything. I mean, their life won't change at all. But I also think, I mean, there's been a huge shift of working class voters in Labour heartlands that have gone to the Tories. They've fallen to the Tories, and I think it's more of a complex issue there because essentially we've got to a point where the media have twisted things so much that people who are vulnerable and people who the Labour manifesto would help are voting against their own interests. Something I saw online last night is I saw a lot of fear from people, and I completely understand that. I mean, it does feel scary. It is scary because we're gradually seeing prejudice and hatred becoming the norm, and I think that is frightening when you see it gradually happening and you're seeing the majority of people in this country seeming to either support it or put up with it. You know, it seems to me that people are more concerned about getting Brexit done and getting immigrants out of the country, or stopping immigrants coming in and having control of our borders, all that lovely stuff. They're more concerned about that than actual people who need help in this country right now. And it's scary as someone with a disability because I have mental health issues and they're already majorly underfunding the mental health services. I spoke before about how they were thinking of, well, they're probably going to stop the steps group, I expect. I mean, we spoke about that in the sessions, that there wasn't enough funding and they had to be really careful about what they were spending their money on. That scares me because we're in an age where especially so many young people are suffering and they need the help. I mean, the facts are that people are going to die because of this, so I don't want to be scaremongering in terms of, oh god, it's the end of the world, but for some people it really is life or death. It's a really hard balance to strike, and that's what I found. And I am finding talking about it, because of course there's still hope and there's so much we can still do, and in some ways because it's got worse we need to be stronger together. It's difficult because at the same time people are rightfully scared and panicking. And you can understand that as well. I mean, it's frightening that Boris has got a majority, because if you look at his manifesto, some of the stuff that the Conservative Party want to do, I mean, of course there's the Australian-based points-based system of immigration, which is hugely worrying to me. But for example, there's a policy on travellers and the rights that are going to be taken away from travellers, and how they can now have their stuff taken from them legally under a Conservative majority. You know, all these things that have gone under the radar during this election campaign and that the media haven't seemed to want to focus on. I mean, I'm gutted because in the Labour manifesto, obviously, they favoured the idea of self-identification for trans people, so they could define their gender themselves, and that is devastating that that's not a thing that's going to happen under the Conservatives. I'm worried about the NHS, and I think that the way it's been portrayed, like this issue, is so lacking in nuance, but that's just so typical, because when you run up to an election, you know, people look at headlines, they want snappy slogans like "Get Brexit done," you know, they don't want to look at the nuance of the issue. But they told us that the NHS wasn't on the table for sale, and yet we have documents that show that it was on the table. Now they're saying, oh, we weren't selling it off, like all of it, but that's not how privatisation works. You know, it wouldn't be like all in one. It wouldn't suddenly be like, here, have our NHS. It would be bit by bit, like making people pay for more, like different services you have to pay a little bit for. They would strip it piece by piece, so it wouldn't be this huge giving over of the NHS, you know. Labour obviously pledged to get the homeless off the streets, and the fact that's not going to happen is awful. It's really bad, and I feel like we can't even comprehend that. I mean, I'm talking from a house, you know, I know that I'm warm and safe in this house, and that I don't have to like live outside in the danger. And you know, that's not going to happen now. And homelessness has risen so much under the Tories, and we don't understand. I mean, we think of homeless people, like the way we're encouraged to think of homeless people is that they're like, oh, different sort of people, and they must have done something wrong to end up there. Any one of us can go through a situation that leads us to homelessness, you know. It's like a slope of different things that might go wrong that lead you to that situation, and once you're in it, it's incredibly hard to get out of it again. These people really need help and compassion, and in my video when I was talking about why I wanted to vote Labour and why I thought you guys should vote Labour as well, I was talking about how upset it made me to be in central London earlier this year and see so many homeless people, and it does upset me. It's really not right. We've got so many children in poverty in this country, and just think about what a rich country we are, and I truly think people have started to just accept it, like that's normal and like that's the way things should be, because that's happening around us and we're used to it. It's like we think that's okay, but it's really not okay. If you look at other countries, we can do so much better. People say, oh, Britain is the best, you know, we're better than everyone else, and they want to believe that. But when you actually look at us compared to other places, we're actually falling majorly behind. It's the disability benefit thing that scares me a lot, especially because I talk about mental health issues on here, and I'm in communication with so many people who suffer with different mental illnesses. This is going to affect a lot of people, and I've spoken to people who this already has affected, and especially with something like mental illness, the idea of having to go through that process of having to prove your mental illness and try and get the benefit and support you need while being villainised, it makes things so much worse, because it makes you feel like you're a burden and like you're a scrounger and like you don't deserve it. And so many people think, oh, we're just throwing benefits to anyone in this country, when in reality it's exceptionally hard for the people who need it to get the benefits that they need to survive. I couldn't bear for that to get more difficult, because that situation has already caused death. You know, it's caused people killing themselves, or it's caused people, I mean, indirectly, for example, when there's not enough money put into the services, people will kill themselves. People will think there's no hope. If they're put on a waiting list instead of able to see a doctor or able to see a counsellor or able to access help, then what do you think is going to happen? Anyway, so I wanted to talk a little bit about why the Labour Party lost, and a lot of people are talking about this right now. Obviously, they're giving their analysis of why they think the Labour Party did so badly in this election, and there are a number of issues which have come up, and I wanted to kind of go through them and give my thoughts on this. The main reason I personally think that Labour did so badly in this election is the Brexit position. I think that the Conservative Party were very clever in that they didn't bother with policy really. I mean, their whole thing was get Brexit done. It's snappy. People in this country are understandably stressed out and annoyed that the process seems to be taking so long, and that nothing's getting done. I mean, obviously it's ridiculous if you look into it, because the Tories have actually been in power this whole time. I mean, they're the ones that have made this whole situation happen and made it so difficult, but again, it's not the sort of thing that goes into a snappy headline, so people don't think about that. So when a lot of people are purely blaming this, for example, on Jeremy Corbyn, and I'll get to this later, because I am a fan of Jeremy Corbyn. I think he's a good man. I think he's principled and I really respect him. But they're ignoring the fact that this was less of a election based on policy. I mean, this was not fought on policy issues. If you ask a lot of voters about the policy stances of the two main parties, how many people could actually come up with actual policies to tell you? It was fought on the idea of Brexit. I mean, loads of people who have gone to the Conservatives who don't consider themselves to be Tory voters in their hearts, and they probably wouldn't do it again, hopefully. It's because they just wanted to get Brexit done and they wanted to respect the result of the first Brexit referendum. The TV is showing interviews with lots of voters who have said that themselves. You know, they like the Labour Party, they wanted the Labour Party, however, they want Brexit done, so they went to the Tories. And to the people saying that the Labour would have done better if they had taken a pure Remain stance, I don't think that really holds up to scrutiny, because if you look at the Lib Dems, which are a centre party, which are really pushing the idea of remaining, they've done very badly as well. And I think Brexit was a very difficult issue for the Labour Party to manoeuvre, and I'm not sure what they should have done. It's incredibly difficult, because on the one hand, of course, people voted to leave the European Union, and I respect that. However, they did not vote for a no deal. You know, they voted for what they thought would be prosperity, and things they were told that we now know were complete lies. So it's such a murky area. I don't know what the right thing to do in that situation would be, so I completely understand and respect Jeremy Corbyn's position on that. The idea that we would vote again and whatever the people decided would be carried through, and I think maybe that was one of the nails in the coffin. but I think morally it was right. So it's complicated, and I understand, of course, that a lot of people wanted Remain, but as we've seen from the Liberal Democrats, that didn't seem to work. So I think we would have seen a huge difference if Labour had taken the position of, we are going to leave the European Union and we are going to commit to Brexit. But I can also understand how difficult that is for Labour, especially because it's a democratic party and it's a party that is so split and trying to reach out to people in the different demographics. I mean, this whole Brexit thing has really damaged this country, and it's damaged Britain. And when I was younger and this happened, I think I made a video about it, it was a while ago, and I remember thinking, well, can it be wrong for David Cameron to give this issue to the people? But now I look at it and I kind of think, well, yes, because there was no plan in place, you know. I don't think there's anything wrong with the issue itself being discussed and voted on, but they needed to have a plan in place. You can't just say in or out, because what's the reality of that? You know, they didn't tell people that properly, and the lack of information is just very difficult. And I think the thing with Brexit that people don't want to talk about, but this is absolutely true, is that a lot of people who want Brexit, it is about immigration and it is about racism and xenophobia, and we don't want to talk about it because they say, oh, you know, you might alienate voters if you call them racist or xenophobic. But when you've got people voting for Brexit because they think there's too many foreign people in this country, that is racist or xenophobic, and we need to look at that. What we see in this country, I think, is a split between the white working class and between everyone else. And I think this is a manipulation by the media, by a lot of politicians, and I think it's been driven into people's minds over a long period of time, and I think it's very hard to get rid of it. And I can understand, and this has been used since the dawn of time, if you've got people who are struggling and vulnerable on the bottom, so the working classes who are mistreated and who aren't paid enough and aren't seeing the services being funded properly, it's so much easier to give those people a villain. So you've got the media and everything saying, well, the reason why you're struggling and why your family are struggling to put food on the table is because of immigrants. When in reality, the immigrants are also getting a really hard time and contributing a lot to this society and to communities. But that's what the rich do, and they've done it since the beginning of time, and it's something we have to keep trying to counter and trying to put out there, that of course they're not going to admit that, oh, we're hoarding the wealth. Of course they're going to tell the vulnerable, you know, the white working classes, they're going to say, it's because you've got foreign neighbours and they've come here and they're getting everything and that's why you can't have it. We know that's a lie, and we know that's ridiculous if we look at statistics. You know, we look at the money in this country, there is enough to go round, but it sticks. And I can't get over, like, that almost, it is evil, like the evil of people with all that money at the top deciding to prey on the vulnerable at the bottom of society who are struggling so much, and to say, right, instead of helping you, we're going to turn you against immigrants and people coming in this country and people with different accents and people who have different colour skin. It's really evil, but it's incredibly effective, and we've seen this throughout history. And so talking about the media bias, I think this is a huge reason why Labour have done so badly, and it's a huge reason why people say they hate Jeremy Corbyn. Now, there is a lot of vitriol against Jeremy Corbyn, and a lot of people say they absolutely despise him. And, oh, I couldn't vote for Jeremy Corbyn, he's awful, he's this, he's that. But if you actually sit down with someone and say to them, okay, well, what is it you hate about Jeremy Corbyn? A lot of what comes out is very much these, again, it's these tabloid sound bites. It's, oh, terrorist sympathiser, a danger to the country, an anti-Semite, he's unpatriotic, he doesn't watch the Queen's speech, he hates Britain. And this is where these arguments are where it starts to get into fascism, and where it is extremely dangerous. Because we know that fascism thrives when there is a huge gap in the economy of this country between the richest and the poorest. And that's when all this sort of imagery of oh, he hates Britain, he doesn't love the Queen, he's an enemy of the people, he's dangerous. If you actually look into that, he's not dangerous, he's not an enemy of the people. Because we're in such hard times that it's like the Tories and the right parties are all like, oh, we've got to go back to the days of empire, and oh, wonderful, Great Britain, the best, but they don't actually want to address the problems. And because Jeremy Corbyn, you know, addresses the issues, and he's not a fan of, for example, the empire, and he thinks that we should be held accountable, for example, for the Iraq War, and I really applaud him for that. People then say he's unpatriotic. That's fascist, and that's scary, because it's not unpatriotic to want to hold your government and your country to account. To me, that's the opposite, because it makes this country, it makes Britain, it makes us a better place. Don't we want to learn from our history and move forward and try and create peace and understand conflicts and move forward together? And of course, the thing with the media is that it's the very rich who are in charge of the media, who often like run the companies and things. So obviously these people aren't going to want socialism in this country. So in some ways it's very obvious. Of course they're not going to be pro-Corbyn, of course they're going to do whatever they can to make people dislike him, but a lot of people don't see that. Now, the anti-Semitism issue has been a huge one this election, and I'm not Jewish myself. I am half Indian, half English, so obviously I'm aware of racism on a different level, but it's completely different. But I think that this is very interesting, because what people are saying is Jeremy Corbyn, or have been saying, is Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite, and it's been repeated and repeated and repeated, and people are thinking, okay, well, that must be true. But if you actually look, has Jeremy Corbyn said or done anything anti-Semitic? No, he hasn't. Now, I completely understand that, of course, the Labour Party has been accused of being too slow to deal with anti-Semitism, and I agree. Like, of course, they need to make that better, and Jeremy Corbyn has made those changes. But what is difficult is when, instead of saying Labour has been too slow to deal with anti-Semitism, it turns into Jeremy Corbyn personally is an anti-Semite, because there's no evidence of that. We know Jeremy Corbyn has been fighting against racism his whole life, and of course that doesn't make anyone immune from criticism, and something I do find very distressing is when people try to silence Jewish people, Jewish left-wingers who want to speak out, because it's very important that their voices are heard. But the absolute irony of this is that the right-wingers, who, you know, are effectively, you know, their party itself is very racist, some of their policy is very worrying, and they're constantly coming out with racism, you know, anti-blackness, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism as well. Recently, Theresa May was there unveiling a statue of Nancy Astor, who was like a Nazi supporter and, you know, really anti-Semitic. It's awful. So then you've got, you know, genuine heartfelt racists using this, like, aha, the Labour Party is anti-Semitic, Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. And again, I don't think there's any issue with people bringing up the fact that Labour needed to deal with anti-Semitism better and more quickly. I think that's an important conversation in a party which is democratic and which needs to be for the vulnerable and for all people. It's important that these conversations happen. But it blows my mind that we live in a time when you've got Boris Johnson openly, from his own mouth, from his own pen, writing things that are Islamophobic and writing things and saying things that are racist. Like, just from any perspective, are racist, straight from his own mouth. It's not just within his party, he's not failing to control it, it's from him. That is not getting anywhere near the same amount of scrutiny. There is constant Islamophobia and anti-blackness coming out of the Conservative Party and people involved in that party, and it's just not getting any of the same scrutiny. And I don't think that, it's not that I think, oh, the Labour Party shouldn't be under scrutiny, because of course they should, all parties should, but it has to be equal scrutiny. And it comes to the point when you look at some of the people involved in this debate, many of whom aren't actually Jewish, and you think, well, if you're concerned about anti-Semitism, that is, of course, that's wonderful, that's valid, it's fantastic, but why is it just anti-Semitism when it's linked to Jeremy Corbyn? Like, why are you silent when it's happening on the right, you know? And it's like, obviously Boris Johnson as well, he's been openly homophobic. I mean, the comment about tank top wearing bum boys, I mean, I've actually seen Conservatives try to argue that that's taken out of context and it's not homophobic. In what world is that not homophobic? I don't understand. But the headline isn't Boris Johnson's party infested with homophobia, is it? That, you know, he's not being yelled at to apologise by Philip Schofield for being homophobic and being Islamophobic and being a racist. There's such a disparity in the way that the issues are dealt with, in the way the two leaders are spoken about, and it's not fair. They need to be under the same amount of scrutiny, and that's just not happened. And I feel like I've lost so much faith during this election in the media. I mean, I've always known it's been slightly skewed, but in some ways it felt like a conspiracy theory at first, you know, to be like, oh, the media is totally biased. But it's really hit me, this election campaign, that truly the media is really lurching to the right. And I've been so disappointed by, for example, the BBC, which I love, because it's a wonderful idea to have the BBC, and I love Doctor Who, and I love, you know, I love EastEnders, I think it's fantastic, but there's been such a clear BBC bias, and it's been incredibly distressing. There needed to be impartiality, and that didn't exist. Some people are blaming the fact Labour have lost on the policy, saying that the policies were too far left. I don't personally agree with that. I've not actually seen anyone disagree with the policy. I think the policies have been really good for vulnerable people, for working class people in this country, for people with disability. I've not seen anyone actually say that about policy, so I almost feel like that's centrist trying to grab the party back into the middle and where it was when Blair was in charge. I've not seen any evidence of that. So something that makes me laugh out of pure just is the fact that people are saying, oh, the campaign was too hostile. Now this is I can't believe this, because Jeremy Corbyn, whatever you think of Jeremy Corbyn, He doesn't stoop to personal insults or anything like that. He's not done that throughout his entire campaign. That's not the way he does politics. And he's consistently said to the people who support him, like, we don't do that. We don't stoop to that level. I remember at I think it was a Labour Party conference, and Laura Kuenssberg stood up to ask a question, and some people booed her, and Jeremy Corbyn took the mic and said, no, we will not do that. She's a journalist in this space, and we will show her some respect, and we will be dignified. I really do respect that about him. So the idea that Jeremy Corbyn is running some sort of abusive cult is absolutely laughable, because you've got other parties, you know, genuinely using the rhetoric of racism and dog-whistling racism to whip people up into a frenzy. And the Labour Party is accused of that. I mean, on the actual election coverage last night, I saw Corbyn supporters being told they were being described as a cult. And why are people who support Jeremy Corbyn's policies and what he stands for a cult? Why are we any different from anyone who supports any other politician? I mean, all this sort of language, it's all kind of tying into this idea that, oh, he's dangerous, he's too radical. Are people not allowed to have those political ideas? I mean, there's people who love the Brexit Party and UKIP and idolise Nigel Farage, and I don't go around calling them a cult, because I suppose it's their individual belief and he stands for what they believe in, unfortunately, and they like that. And there's a lot of people on the centre and older people as well. This is what's ever so frustrating. I talk about victim blaming and tone policing and dynamics within oppression and marginalised groups quite a lot on this channel, because it's something that I'm very interested in. But the idea that, oh, people were too hostile during this campaign, like, they're essentially blaming people being like, oh, like, fuck the Tories and stuff like that. I just feel like, how can you victim blame the people who are rightfully angry because services are being cut, because their actual lives are in danger, you know? The Tory cuts have caused death, austerity has caused death, and that's touched a lot of people. So to say, oh, you're too angry, like, oh, you can't say you hate the Tories, you can't say Tories are bad, why not? Why can't you? Of course that's not something you're going to do if you're a campaigner and you're on the doorstep, obviously not. But to say that about people mostly online and young people and people from marginalised groups, you know, their anger is valid, and it's actually an important part of any political campaign. The anger is because of the injustice, and the injustice has to be addressed. No movement has ever found success and really got into the mainstream without that initial anger, and I talk a lot about how anger is healthy when channelled in a positive way, in terms of you are angry at injustice and you make a decision that you're not going to take it anymore, and you're going to do what you can to make things more just. I mean, this is just, I don't know how much power they think that teenagers online have over these, the majority of older voters, you know, tweeting stuff like, oh lol, I hate the Tories. Like, it's ridiculous to blame that. It's another move from the centrists to be like, oh, we have to reach out, and to some extent I agree. I do agree that we reach out to voters and understand why people have voted differently. I do understand that. I understand that within campaigning. But you cannot demand that people who are from marginalised and vulnerable groups aren't angry and aren't allowed to express that. You know, the Tory party is literally, it's caused deaths. That's how serious it is, you know. It's very easy to sit in the privileged bubble and be like, well, both sides are bad and we need to hold hands and sing, and it's like, well, no, because people are dying. It's more complicated than that. The whole mentality that's been peddled and which has been used by the Tories and which the media has been complicit in is this idea that they're both as bad as each other, nothing's going to change, there's no point in voting. And that is the most dangerous mindset to have. I mean, there's people on my Twitter, and you know, who I respect, who I really like, saying things like, oh, you know, I don't see why people are being shamed for not voting, you know, some people just don't feel like it. And I kind of feel like, I wouldn't want to shame those people, but you can't complain about the state of the country and expect things to be better if you don't use your vote. You know, we're so lucky to have a vote in a democracy in this country, and if you don't use that vote, then I do feel very angry, and I understand there are reasons why people might not be able to go out and vote. You can get a postal vote if you're not someone who can do that. I understand some people might be sick on the day and all that kind of thing, but on the whole, you know, it's that quote, isn't it, about how if you are silent in situations of injustice and oppression, then you have automatically sided with the oppressor. So if you see, like, the NHS falling to pieces and homeless people and you think, oh, it's all rubbish anyway, I'm not going to vote. I mean, who have you helped? You've not helped anyone, and it does make me angry, and I think we do have a huge job in making people understand how important politics is, and that it's not this boring thing, like, it's life and death. And that is something I think Jeremy Corbyn's done fantastically for the Labour Party, and people have said, oh, you know, he's gone too far for the youth vote, but this is the generation that's coming up next, so lots of these people haven't been able to vote yet, but there is this this genuine passion for politics in these kids, and they want to make things better, they want to create more justice in society. They are going to come up next, and I truly think that the work Jeremy Corbyn has put in during this election is going to show fruit in the next election, and it's just a terrible shame that we have to wait another 5 years for that. A lot of people are saying, oh, we should have had a leader like Blair, because he really brought people together and he was a great man and a great leader, but I can't get on board with that, because to me, he took us into an illegal war and he didn't think about the lives of other people in other countries, and he really messed with their societies and caused lasting problems and deaths, and I know it seems extreme, but I do in some ways regard him as a war criminal, because you can't take people into a war with no justification just because you want to go to war. You can't do that. That's not how things work. You can't be in a position of power and take that choice upon yourself. I'm worried that the Labour Party is going to swing back to the centre, and I think that would be a huge mistake, because I think that this movement with Jeremy Corbyn has truly revitalised so many young people and made them care, and I think it's created more people who truly believe in left-wing politics and want justice and want equality and want socialism. I think if we swing back to the centre, we're going to be in trouble, because as we've seen from the Liberal Democrats, that doesn't seem to work, being in the centre. I understand that we might need a leader who is more like cookie cutter. Like, I think part of the reason people have spoken about why people don't like Jeremy Corbyn, but I do think part of the reason is toxic masculinity. And when I say that, I don't mean masculinity is toxic. I mean ideas of what masculinity should be and holding men up to that standard, and them feeling like they have to fit into it. And it's that idea that people have said, oh, he doesn't strike me as a leader, he doesn't come across like a leader because he's, you know, softly spoken and he's got a beard. And people call him things like weirdy beardy and things, but what makes a strong leader? Is it your policy and your heart and what you care about and what you're going to do for the country? Or is it being able to make people laugh and be a joker, you know? I think we need to seriously look at what we as a country regard as strength and what we regard as weakness, because to me, Jeremy Corbyn is 100 times more strong than Boris Johnson, because he is kind and compassionate and he cares and his policies will help people. And Boris Johnson might be able to make a crowd laugh, but his policies are killing people. You know, that's weakness, that's not strength. So yeah, I think Labour's going to shift back into the middle, and I'm going to hate that. I mean, I'm already seeing people in the centre saying things like, oh, we've got to purge the Labour Party of Corbyn supporters, and it's like, what are you talking about, purge the Labour Party? What we need to do, that's scary language, by the way. I mean, they act like it's been infested by left-wingers, when the Labour Party has always been a left-wing party, you know. It actually got drawn back to the centre around the Tony Blair time to become more palatable to, you know, to a mass audience. And I just think that's really dangerous. What we need to be doing is trying to come together, and whoever becomes our next Labour candidate, I'm going to vote for them, because this situation has shown me, you know, you've got genuine people who say they're Labour supporters and they're left-wingers, and they don't like Jeremy Corbyn. They were celebrating yesterday. Their first tweet was not, oh my god, people are going to die from austerity, this is terrible. It was, told you so. Oh, thank God, I'm so happy the British people didn't allow Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister because I didn't like him. How can you call yourself a left-winger? Like, how can you celebrate like that? You're allowed to say, well, I don't like Jeremy Corbyn and I wish he wasn't leader of the party, but I also hate the Tory cuts and what they're going to do and what they're going to do to society. So many of these people in the centre were celebrating, and it was these privileged people who have money and who are safe, and it was ugly. It was really ugly, and I saw so much of that. It was really distressing. We've just got to come together, and I think a lot of American people who I follow were saying the same thing about in their election. You know, whoever ends up as the left candidate, you know, the Labour candidate, we've just got to vote for them. You know, and I've said I would vote for my worst enemy, my personal worst enemy, someone who on a personal level I couldn't stand, if they were standing as a Labour candidate against a Tory government and their policy they were going to enact was going to help the vulnerable. I honestly would put my feelings aside and just say, you know what, I hate your guts, but I care about the vulnerable, so I'm going to vote for you because I'm going to vote for them. And so many people have decided that their dislike and hatred of Corbyn is more important than the lives of the starving kids, you know, the kids in poverty and the homeless people on the streets, and that's disgusting. That really did make me very sad, and that was almost more depressing than the kind of almost fascist celebrations of those on the right. So yeah, it's been a difficult evening last night and a difficult night, but we still have hope, and I know a lot of people are very frightened, and I spoke about this in the start of the video, and I understand that, but we still have hope. And my grandma rang me this morning, and she's a socialist and she's brilliant, and she rang up and she was like, how are you doing, Claudia? And you know, we have to just keep fighting. You know, they're going to show themselves for what they are in the next 5 years, because people will realise that the Conservatives, you know, are not on the side of the working people. They never are. And maybe it will take longer, but, you know, we've got to hang in there, we've got to be there for when it swings back. So I hope that you carry that kind of hope in your heart, and I'm not saying that you should have to feel all like, oh, it's okay, you know, because you might be scared about this, and I understand that. There's some people, you know, this is going to directly affect a lot of us, and me too in some ways. So it is frightening. So I guess I can't tell you how to feel, but I just want you to know that there is still hope, and think about the youth movement and all those people who feel passionately about politics on the left, and I think good things will come. And I'm gutted, I'm really upset about it, you know, more upset than I really am expressing, but we have to look to the future now. We've got 5 years of the Tories, and the vulnerable in society are going to need us. So we need to keep pushing forward for strong left politics, and to make society more equal. We need to do what we can and be kind and just be there for each other and support each other, because it's going to be a rough 5 years, but I hope we all make it through. All we can do is carry on and reflect, and just make sure that next time there's a general election, we just all get together and we just put aside our differences and say, look, this is our Labour leader. We're going to support them because, you know what, we don't want the Tories. And this is again why I think we should have proportional representation. I've spoken about this before. I think the idea of like a two-party system is really, it doesn't work. But yeah. Okay, I hope you're alright, and I'm sorry about the result, but we tried our best, and I think we can all feel proud of our contribution. So I love you so much, and I will see you really, really soon. Okay, love you, bye.